Welcome in season 2, the Cannabiz Conversations podcast. I'm having so much fun doing this. It's awesome. Today is special for me though, because it's someone that I've definitely followed for a long time. And as I sort of developed a plan to come out with this show, definitely was in the top 5 of my roster of who I was looking to have on here. But I'll be honest with you, I was a little intimidated to have him on season 1 because I didn't know if I had done enough to have him accept my offer. So whether that's the case or not, I am excited to bring you Brett Puffenbarger. Brett, how are you today, man?
Man, I am living the dream. And I don't mean that in the I want to kill myself way. I mean that in the I'm actually having a great day.
Him making it happen. Well, I love to hear people start off that way. Brett, on the show, we like to get into the origin story, kind of, how you found the plant, where you began. And so we kick it off by saying this. It doesn't matter where that happened. For me, I found the plant when I was young, but I found the medicinal value by the time I was 18. Migraine suffer, all kinds of issues. So, it can be any stretches of the imagination as far as people are concerned. So why don't you kick us off? Why don't you tell us where it all started, man?
2-part story. The business side of it started because I grew up in rural Virginia and I had a rich cousin who lived up by DC, and I could buy stuff in bulk way cheaper in high school, drive my happy little ass up to DC and sell it to all of her rich friends for way more. But it wasn't a thing I did. I would smoke at parties and stuff, normal teenager stuff, but that wasn't my life with it. Military, all of that, didn't come to cannabis for myself until my late 20s, right? I had an ex-girlfriend who said something mean one time. She's like, "You're really an asshole. I think you should smoke some weed. I hear it's great for veterans." And I did what any enterprising person would do when faced with that challenge. I found the only person who smoked weed that I knew, which was her mom, and I bought a $90 eighth and then YouTubed how to make a gravity bong. And yeah, man, I cut a whole watermelon in half and ate it with a spoon, and it was glorious. And hell yeah.
Wow. What a little, enough to unpack there. To start us off, kicking us off with all of it happening in one place. I love it. All right. So let me take it back to running from rural Virginia up to DC. When you talk about, obviously a little bit here, a little bit there, when you were in that mode, in that mindset, did you ever really think that where we are today, Brett, just on the surface, when you were that young, did you ever think that this was something that you wouldn't have to necessarily? I still have to be in the shadows because I live in a prohibition state, so I still am in the shadows. But those who aren't, did you see it that way? Did you have any inkling of that when you were younger? It's kind of something I've been asking people.
Bro, I don't even know if I was self-aware enough to think that way. I was thinking I'm broke and this fixes it. Just straight up, right?
That's how it happens, though, right? That's what you end up having to do in life, and whatever it is to find the way. And that's the same thing we ended up finding was, I had jobs, I did things, but at the end of the day, after work was over, if I was going to go party, for me as an enterprise kid, I just always thought, well, I like to party my own way. I don't do shots. I don't take, 6-foot bong hits. I like to just get into my own way, and I've always been that way. But to your point, if I'm going to be at a party, I might as well make money here. This just makes sense to do that. Now, the veteran part, I want to hop into a little bit because, your story sort of, to me at least, really weaves that sort of that deal together on my end. So talk to me about how did you get into the military? What was the entry point? Kind of what was the experiences like there? Looking back on it now as, a mature adult who is, trying to obviously still probably deal with all the things that you started with there.
This is actually a funny story too. So when I got out of high school, I was just a wreck of a person, no direction, no goals, all fuck you punk rock, let's go. And I realized it pretty quickly, a couple months after graduation, this is not sustainable. So I got it in my head that I was going to join the Navy and work on nuclear submarines because I heard you could get a job making 6 figures straight out of the Navy. So I'm sitting there thinking cool, $23.50. That sounds awesome. So I joined the Navy. I tried to join the Navy. And I went through all of the stuff, the medical doctor's appointments. And you go to the thing where you take the test to get in. And I passed it. And they're like, cool, you're great. get done, go sit in the parking lot for like 7 hours because the Navy recruiter never showed up to pick us up, and the Marine Corps recruiter did. And then we had like a 3-hour drive home because rural Virginia, we had to go to a city to do it. And in that 3 hours, I'm pretty sure this guy manipulated me heavily. The shortest possible version of it is he basically said, yeah, I knew when you walked in the recruiting office, you were too much of a wimp to join the Marine Corps. And 18-year-old me said, yeah, no, I'm not. What do I do? So I'm in the military, straight up open contract. And here's a good one that I don't pull out of the bag of tricks often. They sorted me to be military police. They're like, fuck you, punk rock redneck kid that liked to sell drugs and like do whatever he wanted, got sorted to be a cop. But I never got to do that. So I didn't even like, I had to go through the whole school. They're like, this is how you be a cop. And then at the end, it was me and 2 other guys. They're like, hey, everybody else is going to like, do cop stuff. You guys get to go escort the bomb squad around Iraq, and your job is to explode so they don't have to because they're worth more. Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. So Brett, with that part of it, so you get like, you talk about it being kind of recruited military style, right? A little bit thinking about that on my end. When that process started for you, is it because, and I've dealt with this in my own family and I have these questions all the time. So you talk about coming out of high school, no direction. Was that the thought for you? Was that will give you direction, that will give you that sort of deal? And that, that direction out of high school is the military. Is that the way to get it?
Sort of. So like we can unpack that in a couple of layers. Okay. Generally speaking, the military targets poor people of any race, nation, like origin area of the country. True. They intentionally target poor people. I was a poor people, right? Like I grew up in a 700 square foot house in the foothills of Appalachia, sharing a bed with the neighbor kid that my parents stole from his abusive parents, right? Like I grew up poor. So I was that natural target for them of like, hey, this is your exit. So it was 2-part, right? 18-year-old me didn't want to be in small town Virginia. So this is how I could leave and see the world, right? Like, sure. And it was steady income. That was it. I was the not so different than that stereotypical recruiting process, right? You can see it in basically all of rural America and most inner cities. Like think about who makes up the military, right?
Yeah, no, and I think about where I see I always make a comment to my wife where I see the actual recruitment centers. I always say to her, I'm like, don't you find it particular where we are like right now? And this is like one of the nicer buildings, or this is one of the, and so again, it's not like me on a conspiratorial thing. That's not who I am.
No, make it a conspiracy. Let's take it a step further. They go into public education. They are allowed to come recruit in public education that we agreed to, which is arguably just training people to be automatons, right? The goal of school is not to learn, at least not lower education, maybe higher education, right? Maybe. But like lower education, high school and below, is to learn how to follow orders, follow the rules, and then they let these people come in. Like think about the programming of this. I'm going to go way on a conspiracy theory and people are going to freak out. They're not going to know where I'm going with this, but think about this, the Pledge of Allegiance in schools, right? It is literally a thing written by the head of the Communist Party of the United States, promoted by the Republicans of the United States. And it's a manifesto of pro-state, like bowing down pro-state, right? Yeah. So like we're literally programming our children to move into a statist driven thing. And then we let the military in. So straight up, I was the product of that, right? Like,
but that's terrifying. It's terrifying because you put these pieces. I'm 43 years old, so I'm the Dare kid. I'm the Pledge of Allegiance. We're all that same thing, right? So here you are looking back on it retrospectively, and I've had these thoughts, right? This is the kind of stuff I only say in my head, Brett. So I'm having a good time with this already because I thought the same thing in school, right? I was just telling my wife the other day. I said I thought the same thing in church. I used to always think, what the fuck are we talking about? What is the point of this? Why are we doing this? But you're right. It is about program. It's about control. It's about understanding what goes next. My wife always says school conditions you for work, right? 8 to 4, listening to somebody, doing something, going from place to place, following tasks. And you're just like, yeah, I don't want to do that. So for me, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been with my whole life. Like I worked for people because I didn't realize I had the guts to start my own company until my wife told me to like a decade ago. But before that, working for people, doing my own thing, always feeling like this isn't going to work for me. I don't want to be programmed. I don't want to be this person. So I approached my nephew. He was a senior in high school at the time. I said, hey, bro, you guys let the military in. You guys let the colleges in. Do you talk to entrepreneurs? Because you went to the same high school I did. He goes, no, Uncle Sean, you don't no, we don't. They only let the military and colleges in. And I'm like, see, that's a problem for me. That's a problem for me because entrepreneurs could tell people a lot of different things about. I mean, how many of those kids are really going to go to college, Brett? You know, and the percentage that.
Well, that's the American dream, right? Like that's the American dream we get sold, right? You can be anything you want until you get into school, and then they slowly erode that over time. And then they sell you the high interest rate, overpriced thing where you can earn your right to do that or earn the ability to do that back. And just to be clear, I am not ignorant to the fact that I have both fallen for the trap of joining the military and following that path. I am also willingly choosing to do a PhD right now, knowing that it's overpriced and all of that. Because at this point, I feel like if I'm going to, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, beat the system, I'm going to do it in that way, right? Like I'm going to do all the hurdles. Like I'm going to jump through the hoops and the things. And like when I get to the end, then nobody can tell me I can't keep asking these questions, right? Because that's who I've been my whole life. Like question everything. Like that's who my parents were, right? Like question everything, especially if it's an institution. I don't care what the institution is, a political party, the government, the religion, the school, the people, even large social movements. Question it all of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that you have to look around and question it. I think, you know, as someone who, you know, my wife and I don't have kids. So, you know, the conversation's always weird for people, right? They're always like super uncomfortable. And like, they kind of like take their kid and put them behind them like I'm some kind of animal, you know, it's like by choice. Like my wife couldn't have kids. And so like that wasn't a thing for me. Like I always knew I'd be the world's best uncle, but I'd be a terrible fucking dad. Okay. Like I am as selfish as the day is long. I like to spend my time doing what the fuck I want to do. That's it. And I knew that. So, but I've always been weirded out by children. I don't know why, but I just knew it wasn't for me. And so when you go through those things, you talk about questioning the establishment. I was told one time 2 out of 10 people don't have kids, right? Whatever the statistic was. I'm standing in a room with my mom's family. It's like 400 people deep. And I'm literally like the only dude in this room that doesn't. I'm like, so many of you are lying to yourselves. You know, so many of you have a kid you don't want, which I mean, throw a dart at the wall, you'll find plenty of those. But like the thing
or shouldn't have.
You talk about the establishment. It's hard for me, dude. That's hard to follow.
Have you seen the movie Mr. Fantastic?
I have not.
It's a weird movie, and I'm not supporting the guy or the message, but the premise I think is interesting as a thought exercise going down this road. So my wife and I are, you know, late 30s. We don't have kids. We face a lot of the same questions, and we've been talking about maybe changing that. And I often thought that way, right? Like I'm going to do my own thing and yada, yada, yada. Something a lot of people don't know about me is I am a very simple person when it comes to making life decisions. Like everything for me boils down to a couple of basic movie quotes because I have echolalia because I'm autistic and echolalia is a thing we have. So for me, right, it's like the whole like poor to what I do now origin story thing all goes back to the Heath Ledger movie, A Knight's Tale, right? Everybody can change their stars. That's my whole ethos. I'm like, heck yeah. But when it comes to this one, right, like the choice to have kids and all of that, I really challenge myself to think about like that line from Troy with Achilles, like, this is why no one's going to remember your name. And then I pair it with that movie, Mr. Fantastic. So the point of Mr. Fantastic is really simple. This guy is like a Ted Kaczynski type figure, lives out in the woods with his 5 kids after his wife dies of cancer, total Looney Tune. And people think he's a Looney Tune, and he brings his kids and they're like, well, your kids don't know nothing. And he starts asking his like 8-year-old daughter, he's like, can you explain the 3 branches of the government? Can you explain bicameral legislation? Can you explain why the 1972 change in blah, blah, blah laws? And she rattles it all off, but doesn't just regurgitate the information like one would expect in school. So he intentionally walks her through proving that she could regurgitate information. And then he starts asking her like complex decision-making questions, like opinion questions. Point being, the combination of those 2 things have put me in a place where if I am going to truly interact and be part of a society that I don't necessarily agree with for a variety of reasons. I don't think anybody does at this point, right? We live in an incredibly fractured society at this point.
For sure.
I want to make at least one difference in a very direct way. And I think I make a difference all the time, right? Like, I think anybody with a large social media profile probably thinks the same thing, right? We impact a lot of people for good or bad, the whole Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility, all of that. But to shut my whole little rant on this up, my whole ethos there became, I'm going to put all of my energy into making one better person. Just one. World of 9 billion. I'll do my best to help them, but I can't control that. But I can do what I can to make one really good one. So that's the goal right now.
So the goal is to make it happen. The goal is to go ahead and get into that part of it. And I think the way you go about thinking about it, Brett, I think is so deliberate that I believe it's what I wish there was more of. You know, I wish it wasn't just the concept of what comes next. Do you know what I mean? Like, my wife and I have been married 20 years. We've been listening to this for 21 years, right? It's this idea of this plus this equals this. And I just think there's different routes through things. And I think you in your 30s now talking about that and being so intentional, I think is all that I wish of that part of the world. I really do. And like I said, for me, I knew that it wasn't it. But I have yet to hear someone be that intentional about it in a conversation. So I really appreciate that, man. Thank you so much for sharing that, because
I'm a chronic overthinker.
No, you said that, right? That's what you said. You like to just, keep it basic. Let me ask you something. You mentioned autism.
Yeah.
When did you learn about that?
Oh, like a year ago. That's been a whole new thing. Yeah. So I forgot what happened. I was talking to my VA therapist, and he started asking me a bunch of questions. And I realized what he was doing was running me through a crash course version of the DSM-5 criteria for cluster B personality disorders.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And then he got off topic, and I'm like, wait a minute, these are a different, clearly he is running down diagnostic stuff without telling me. And I realized what he was doing was the diagnostic criteria for autism, ADHD, at least the baseline that would then lead to the thing. So I just asked him, I'm like, are you trying to guess? Do you think I have autism? Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I do. You should go read about it. And then next time we meet, tell me if you agree. So, of course, now in hindsight, I know what happened. But at the time, I thought I did what everybody does. And I voraciously researched until I had about 40 folders of PubMed information on diagnostic criteria for autism. And then I walked downstairs and I went, wife, we have autism. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, you have autism, you have hypervisual autism, and I have hyperverbal autism, and we both have level 1 autism. And she said, no, we don't. And I said, the fuck we don't. Let's go ahead and find out. We're going to put this to the test. So we did. We went and did the whole, hominis dominus, cognitive testing thing. And so I have level 1 autism. Technically, I guess you would call it hyperverbal, meaning language and the process of language is the thing I understand most in the world. My wife is hypervisual. So example, you see that picture, that photo right there?
Yes.
That's actually not a photo. That's a pencil drawing she did that won the county fair award in first place as a photograph. And it's a pencil drawing. So that's her. She is hypervisual. Sure. Yeah, she can level things and measure things at sight from across the room, and it's wild.
It's awesome. That's awesome. I love how you say it's we too. That's how my wife and I talk about things, and it's something that I think I've probably something I should test myself for, Brett, at the end of the day. I think it's something that I walk myself through a lot in the way that just the way I break things down, the way that I see things, the way that things happen to me. I always kind of have thought, but I didn't also, Brett, in the same way, it wasn't something that was necessarily brought up by my therapist. So it felt to me like I was, I don't know. I didn't want to be pandering is not the right word, right? But I didn't want to be like, oh, well, this must be where I fit, or this must be what I look at. And I also didn't want to insult the concept or idea of autism by thinking just because I think differently or things connect differently, or I've been doing this, my whole life, that maybe I've suffered from it. I kind of stayed away from maybe a specific diagnosis about it.
I think you are suffering from a derangement of American politics, where we feel afraid to ask questions. Because asking questions and wondering and seeking an answer should be the goal of everyone. But instead, we get afraid of that, right? Like, it's something as simple as that. Like, your feeling of like, oh, whatever. How the hell do you think the rest of us got here? Right? Like, don't feel that way, brother. Don't do that ever. Like, just wonder, and then ask, and then seek the thing, right? Like, that's what we did, because that's what it started as. And even if he hadn't, I would almost venture to say I would have found it eventually myself, because I've researched the shit out of everything. And I wasn't ignorant to the fact that I had started noticing a bunch of content on like Instagram that was like, hey, if you do this, you're autistic. And I'm like, I didn't do that. So I had noticed that way before he ever brought it up. Like, so I guess it was not entirely accurate to say it started with him. It started where you were. So go for it, man.
Yeah, again, I've been doing therapy long enough in my life. I think it's part of something that should just be the natural evolution. I have this idea that my wife tells me all the time that I need to challenge myself more in that arena and more in the spiritual arena and just try to do more. And I always say to her, like, my insides are built on a house of cards, all the trauma I've dealt with, and I just kind of stack it up, and I know where everything is, and I know how it all works. And if you're asking me to do this and I do that, and then all of a sudden those cards fucking crumble, like, what if I can't get out of bed tomorrow? And I think it's just self-sabotage. I think it's self-discovery in a way that I've always used drugs as self-discovery since I was 15. And one of the biggest things I ever did was out in the deserts of Arizona as any good 20-year-old, and, really going on a journey for myself through peyote and seeing what life can look like and differences. And I dealt with a lot of trauma that had happened from, 10 to 20 in that moment, in that day. And it really helped me with all that structure. But honestly, since 20, that's 20 years ago, I haven't fucked with the structure, because it was something that I continued to learn and evolve myself through other ways. And I was a big microdoser for a while until my wife got sick, and then my life just sort of everything. She was my tripping partner, and then she couldn't be, and so it just wasn't as fun and exciting to go on self-discovery. So just the way it goes. But at the end of the day, I think that people need to talk more, and I think that that's an important part, Brett. And hearing you talk about this, the same thing I tell people when I talk to Dustin from Fat Nug. Same thing. Hey, military, the backgrounds, all the things people have seen and done. And here you guys are talking about being open, talking about yourself, talking about how you feel, stereotypical or not. I think it's important people realize that military or other, just people, just dudes trying to figure out what the next step is. When you look back on how you've sort of evolved your journey, you brought up therapy at the VA. Has therapy been a big part of your own self-discovery? Was it sort of mandated in the beginning? How did that relationship for you begin?
It was never mandated. When I got out of the military, I thought I was an alcoholic. I don't know if I was or not, or if irrelevant to the story. So I thought I was that. I tried the whole AA route for a little bit. Didn't really vibe with that. Didn't really vibe with life not working out. But I was never in a place where it was forced on me, because I've always had some little bit of luck on my side or wits or something that kept myself in a place where that wasn't forced. So I've always been pretty fortunate that it was always a choice, right? Like, I always came around to it on my own and figured it out on my own. So therapy has been a big part of my life for, probably at least 10 years. A couple of years after I got out, like the first couple of years when I got out of the military in 2011 were a little rough. I made a lot of terrible decisions. And then I finally got like a real job that I enjoyed and started going to therapy at about the same time. And then life got way better when I joined cannabis. And then life got way, like as an industry. And then life got way, way better when I met my wife. And now everything's kind of...
Yeah, man, my life changed when I met my wife 21 years ago. Same thing. I was someone who, I was an alcoholic. I came from alcoholics. I knew the route. I bought my first house when I was 20 years old. I came out of school with purpose. I knew what I wanted to do. I made money. I did all these things. And it just, I did drugs. I did everything. I did everything you could do. I sold cars. My wife,
I sold cars.
Yep. I sold cars, and then I got into the car business, and I never left. I never left the money. I never left the drugs, the party. And I always just thought that was the way it was. And I met my wife, and she didn't party. And she was like, came home drunk one night. She's like, what is this? I don't, whatever this is, I don't want to see this. I don't want to deal with this ever again. Like, I don't like this. And I thought to myself, all right, like, so it's you are drinking? She's like, yeah, I guess so. I'm like, oh, I'll pick you. That's cool. Like, I don't drinking's fine. And I was able to, I was able to quit. I was able to stop. And I remember coming to my dad and saying, hey, Dad, we were at a family wedding, and we were both sober. And he's been sober at this point, 30 years. And he says, hey, look at all these idiots, right? Look at them all. They're not going to remember anything tomorrow morning. And we're just kind of joking, laughing. And I said, yeah, but Dad, here's the thing. Like, I've been sober like 5 months now. And I got to be honest with you. I think I get it, and I think that I can come back and I can moderate. I can have a drink and I can just, get a little buzz on, enjoy that. And he sort of looks at me, his mouth wide open. I said, what's up? He goes, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I said, what is dumb? He said, moderation. He goes, you buy a 30-pack, you drink a 30-pack. Otherwise, what's the point, son? And I'm like, see, I think there's a difference now. I thank you. I think that this is me realizing that if I have self-control and moderation, Brett, is how I live my entire life. Drugs, alcohol, work. I don't do great with the work moderation, but I'm working on it. And so moderation to me has been the cure-all. For you, when you look at where you are, how your use of cannabis, is it medical for you? Is it purposeful? Is it something that how do you use today versus, let's say, 10 years ago?
All right. Do you want the hella transparent answer, the political answer, or like the answer I usually give?
All right, look, I'm a man of transparency. I live a whole life. I create a whole company around that. So, and I prefer you to give the answer that you most want. I mean, you're telling me to be open. I'm going to tell you to be open.
I am cripplingly addicted because I am incapable of dealing with mostly physical shit. So I have like a broken back and like a messed up shoulder and terrible knees and all of that. At this point, though, my brain doesn't work right without it. Like, cannabis is my normal. And as much as people will be really mad at me for saying that, like, I am cripplingly dependent on it. So is my wife on gabapentin. So are tons of people on SSRIs. Like, that's how medicine works. Like, chronic illnesses don't go away, yada, yada, yada. So to be clear, I am cripplingly dependent on it by choice because of the circumstances. Now, if you want to get into the actual usage, I'm incredibly specific with my uses. What I'll consume, when I will, how I will, all of that is incredibly tailored for this, mostly because I have sarcoidosis, which is a lung condition. I had tuberculosis in the military because I jumped over a wall into a chicken coop because an old lady threw a potato at me and I thought I was a grenade. And yeah, that's a true story. Yeah. So I got tuberculosis in the military, gave me sarcoidosis, which is a really ridiculous disease that makes all of my scars turn into hard bumps and pop open, and it's terrible, but it also messes up my lungs. So I am very careful to ingest cannabis with shit tons of beta caryophyllene. I'm a big fan of dry herb vaping. I'll survive off of vape pens, but I'm pretty selective in the brand, not necessarily of the cannabis that goes in it outside of like lab testing, because I think a lot of that's questionable, but down to the like vape hardware manufacturers they use and stuff because of like some of the contaminants. Try to stick to a very specific regimen with that sort of stuff. So I guess I treat it like the average person treats taking a very serious long-term medication on a very specific regimen. Yeah.
That's what I like to hear. That's the end of the day. Look, cripplingly addicted to something and being able to take it in a way that makes sense for your body, makes sense for what you do. And to me, I think people hear the word addicted, Brett, and I think, Brett doesn't go to work. Brett can't get out of his house. Brett slaps his wife around. You know what I mean? Like this concept and idea that Brett, is steps away from walking off a bridge because he's addicted to something. I think that how we use things is what makes us look addicted, right? Like, for instance, I woke up this morning with a killer migraine, but I knew you and I were doing this today and I'm going to do this. So by 9 a.m., I've already ripped my flower and my migraine is well on its way out. And so people were like, you did what at 9 a.m? I was like, sorry, dude, don't know what to tell you. That's just the way it works. You'd go take a medication, which is what I used to do in my, my teens and 20s. And I decided to give away all the medication and just stick to this specific regimen, the way that I do things. And I think it's something that's, I don't, like you said, people wake up, they take vitamins. People wake up, you know what I mean?
Addiction isn't a bad word, though. Lots of people are addicted to caffeine. Lots of people, you're addicted to daily medications. Everybody who takes a daily medication is addicted to that daily medication. That doesn't mean you are an addict, right? Like that is a specific thing, but it's not a dirty word to point one of things I find frustrating in society when very specific language is misinterpreted to be very broad language, right? Like people would hear that and get upset with either one of us for using the appropriate term. That is the right term. Like that is the scientific term. That is the appropriate thing to call it. But people hear it with all of these implications. And then it's like, I didn't say all of that, right? Like that's like whatever it is, argumentum excellentio, right? Like that is you creating a straw man argument out of the things I didn't say to then cut down to not even address the things I did say, right? Like what's it, a tu quoque or whatever in the other style of rhetoric? Like, no. So to be very clear, world, I just said I'm addicted to weed.
I may have said that.
But it's not a problem.
Yeah, you got that right, man. Brett, we've done the sweater thing. Before we go to second half, break it down. What's the sweater about? I feel like I'm out of the mix here.
Oh, positive mental attitude. So I grew up in the hardcore punk scene. This is one of my favorite bands, singers, Toby Morse. He's got a podcast called One Life, One Chance, where he interviews like punk rock people or famous people who are like punk rock, metal, that kind of stuff about life things. And their big thing was positive mental attitude. They're real upbeat, happy dudes, despite having terrible childhoods in inner city New York in the 80s. And I like that
situation. I like that. I like how that positive mental attitude, just in general, I think is a wonderful way to look at things. Again, we've all been through something, right? So I think to keep that in context is always important. Brett, we're going to get ready for the second half here. Why don't you give us just a sneak preview of what you want to talk about in the second half?
Oh, man, I don't think we finished the life story part. So there's a couple of fun ones there. And then I've got a couple of interesting things I think aren't talked about enough in cannabis. Some of the more obvious ones and some of the less obvious ones that I think people are afraid to talk about, or if they do, they get attacked. And I feel like at this point, we can actually have a full conversation about it without people freaking out until after we put it out.
Oh, I love this. I love this. All right, well, we're going to get into a little bit more of the origin story because it's long. It's got some intricacies to it, but I'm excited to hear about topics. Folks, that's the whole point of the show here. I don't know if people know that. The point of the show is to come out here and have a conversation. I'm a reasonable human being, okay? I try to have other reasonable conversations with people. We try to bring a reasonable message to the world. That's what we're trying to do. Outside of that, don't forget, none of it's possible this season without our wonderful sponsors. My man, Damian Solomon, King Solomon Nutrients. It doesn't get any better. Dude's been doing it for 20 years. He knows if you're using soil. He knows if you're using hydro. Man makes it work no matter what. Best part about it, for me, honestly, besides the fact that it's low cost, it's 2 steps. Okay, it's not overcomplicated. This dude can make anything you grow look bigger and better. Check him out, ksolomon.com. We appreciate it. Everybody, get ready for the second half. And remember, the point of this show is to remove the stigma and uplift the plant. We hope you have yourselves a great week and join us for part 2. We'll see you soon.